Challah bread is known for its characteristic braided shape, but also for its velvety, tender, and yeasty and slightly sweet interior. It's a bread that is delicious with any meal, and quite frankly, it makes the best French toast in the world. So join me today in making a loaf of fresh challah. To start the process, you need to make your yeast sponge. You need to combine 1/4 cup of warm water with 1 packet of active dry yeast. I have a jar of yeast here, so the equivalent of 1 packet is just 2 1/4 teaspoons. And I'm gonna add the yeast and use a fork to stir it until it's fully dissolved before I add 1/4 cup of flour to make the sponge. This recipe calls for bread flour, which is different than all-purpose flour in that it gives the bread a stronger structure, which is important as the bread rises and bakes. Now that I've mixed my sponge together, I'm just gonna cover it with a towel and let it sit in an ambiently warm place for about 20 minutes until it's really foamy. While my yeast sponge is developing, I'm going to prepare the other sets of ingredients. So in my big bowl, I'm going to combine 2 1/3 cups of bread flour with 1 full teaspoon of kosher salt. And then in another bowl, I'm going to whisk together my liquid ingredients. In this bowl, I have 2 whole eggs and 2 egg yolks. And to this, I'm going to add 3 tablespoons of granulated sugar, 3 tablespoons of water, and 1 full tablespoon of honey. And I'm gonna whisk this all together until it's fully homogeneous and the sugar is dissolved. You can see that the sponge is nice and foamy. And if you make this at home, you'll be able to smell how incredibly aromatic and yeasty it is. So I'm gonna go ahead and add my sponge to my flour and encourage it to unstick from the sides of the measuring glass. In addition to being the rising agent, the yeast is part of what lends the really strong and rich flavor of challah to challah. And so we have the yeast sponge added, and now we're going to add our egg mixture. The egg yolks also add richness, and then the sugar and the honey give challah its characteristic, very subtle sweetness. And lastly, we're going to add 3 tablespoons of melted vegetable shortening. And this does something similar to egg yolks. It enriches the dough, and the final product will be exceptionally tender and really soft to the touch because of these additions. Okay, so now I have all of my liquid ingredients in here, and I'm just gonna mix it together with a spoon until a shaggy dough forms. And then I'm gonna transfer the shaggy dough to my work surface and knead it for a full 10 minutes. This is to cause what we call full gluten development, so that the bread has a really sturdy structure within the dough that makes it perfect for trapping the air bubbles that are gonna be created by the yeast and forcing the loaf to puff and rise and be beautiful. As you knead, the dough will pick up some of these dry, floury bits. And so just keep kneading, set your timer, and you'll notice that the dough will transform from being this uneven, lumpy mass into being a really stretchy, elastic, smooth, and supple dough. And a quick lesson in kneading, when you have your dough, just use the firm part of your palm to push the dough down into the table, and then use your other hand to flip it on top of itself and push down with this palm. And this process, when it's picked up, makes for really easy kneading that doesn't put a lot of strain on your arms or your back. Now that I'm done kneading my dough, I have a clean bowl here that I've greased with some oil, and I'm gonna place the dough right into the bowl, cover this with plastic wrap, and let it sit in a warm place for about an hour. The dough will double in size, and so that's what you're looking for. If an hour has gone by and it's not quite doubled in size, give it another 10 or 15 minutes, and it should be just fine. Now that my dough has doubled in size, I'm going to first punch it down to release a lot of the gas that's built up in the dough, and then I'm gonna transfer it to my work surface. And I'm gonna shape it into a log and cut it into 4 equal pieces, and then shape each of those pieces into an oblong shape that's about 5 inches in length and 2 inches in width. By using the surface tension on the table and pushing the dough, it creates this nice even and taut surface to make your perfect little mounds. The idea is that you don't want any seams on the surface of the dough. All right, and if you have cooking spray, now would be a great time to spray your dough. I don't have cooking spray on hand, so I'm going to brush them lightly with some vegetable oil and then cover them with plastic wrap and let them rise right here for about 20 minutes. Okay, cover with plastic wrap. And notice I've separated them so that they're not incredibly close, and that's because they're gonna puff a little bit over the next 20 minutes, and you don't want them to run into each other. Working one at a time after 20 minutes have passed, you're gonna use the palm of your hand to press out any of the air in the dough mounds. And then we're gonna roll each of the dough mounds into about a 2-foot long rope. Once you have rolled out all of the ropes of dough, lay them next to each other vertically so that the length of the dough moves away from you as you're working. And this next step is the trick to making challah. It's one of the several ways that you can braid challah, and I think this is probably the easiest one. Starting in the middle of the rope and working with the rope on the far right, simply lift it over the next piece and under the next piece and over the next piece. Like so. And then as you're moving, you'll notice that the piece on the far right changes. So this next rope is the one now on the far right, and you will lift it over the next piece, under the next piece, and over the next piece. And now this is the one on the far right. Over the next piece, under the next piece, over the next piece. And continue working this way until you have finished braiding this side. Just like so. Once you've finished, you take these ends, just like this, and you simply wrap them around each other, press with your hand, and fold it under. So that the braid right here, the rounded braid, finishes this end of the loaf. And then we simply flip it around and do the same thing. So over, under, over. Start with the far right again, over, under, over. And then press this together and fold under. And here we have our braided challah loaf. So simply pick up your braid and transfer it to a parchment paper lined baking sheet. And we're now gonna make an egg wash of 2 egg yolks with some water and brush the entire surface of the dough. We're gonna cover it and let it sit for an hour, and it will increase in size pretty dramatically. And then we'll brush it again with egg wash and sprinkle it with some sesame seeds before baking it. This double brushing of egg wash makes the exterior of the challah a deep, dark, nut brown color that makes the challah really shiny and very eye-catching. Since we're brushing it twice, just cover your leftover egg wash and pop it in the fridge for later use. And then cover your challah and leave it in a warm place to rise for an hour. Once an hour has passed, you'll see that your loaf has grown considerably in size. Now we're gonna brush it again with our egg wash, and I'm going to sprinkle it with some white sesame seeds, and I also have poppy seeds, so I'm gonna do both. I have my oven preheated to 375 degrees, so once you brush it and sprinkle your toppings on it, you wanna throw it right into the oven until it sounds hollow when you tap it, which is about 22 to 25 minutes. You're looking for an internal temperature of 195 degrees. My loaf is beautifully browned. It has a deep chestnut color to it from the egg wash that makes the poppy seeds and the sesame seeds kind of pop on the surface. It's important to let your challah sit and cool completely before slicing. And if you want to make it a day in advance and just put it on a shelf and forget about it for a day, it's great the next day. Once you slice it, you want to consume the loaf within the next day or two. And if it gets a little stale on you, slice it up and dunk it in a custard and turn it into French toast. Because as I mentioned earlier, it's incredible. Unlike any other bread, challah has this richness that comes from the egg yolks and the shortening, which also makes the inside really tender and soft. But when you bite into it, there's a certain chew to the bread that comes from the 10 minutes of kneading the dough and that really tight gluten structure that you can see when you look at the inside of a slice of bread. The outside crust is firm, and so it kind of resists the bite, but once you get past the crust, the inside is just velvety soft. Altogether, this bread is ideal for really any meal. It's a great companion for soups and stews. It's a wonderful toast to slather some jam and butter on. If this recipe seems interesting to you, or you've wanted to give challah a shot, then by all means, try our recipe and follow the easy steps that I have outlined in this video. If you've enjoyed the video that you've seen today, then subscribe to the Southern Living YouTube channel, where you're sure to find other videos just like this one that we know you'll enjoy. See you next time. Bye.